Under the Pyramid of Khufu lies a network of tunnels that the Egyptian authorities have kept silent about for 80 years. What was discovered there in 2017 shook scholars' notions about ancient civilizations and forced a reassessment of many established dogmas. In March 2017, an international team of physicists completed a scan of the Great Pyramid using muon detectors, instruments that register cosmic particles penetrating thick layers of stone. These measurements produced unexpected results and even forced skeptics to admit, inside the monument, there's a huge cavity at least 30 meters long, located above the so-called Grand Gallery. But that discovery proved to be the most startling part, lay much deeper, beneath the pyramid's foundation, in an area where the official version of history does not anticipate any voids at all. Imagine standing at the base of one of the most massive stone structures of antiquity. On the Giza Plateau rests an enormous mass, 6.5 million tons of limestone and granite, laid with astonishing precision, stone upon stone. The base measures 230 meters, and the monument's height reaches 146 meters, comparable to a... The story, however, begins with an earlier event. On March 9, 1993, German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink lowered a miniature robot named Upuaut into the southern shaft of the king's chamber. In ancient Egyptian, the name means opener of the ways. The robot moved along the narrow stone corridor, and its cameras transmitted images to the researchers in real time. First, it traveled 60 meters, then 70. The pins were covered with a green patina of time and looked like protruding handles of an unknown mechanism. From the details found, Gantenbrink immediately understood. This was not merely a blocking slab, but his instruments indicated a cavity behind the stone, and his intuition suggested that behind this door, there was space. Unexpectedly for the researchers, the Egyptian authorities halted the work. This abrupt stoppage raised many questions and left open what might have shed light on the hidden parts of the ancient structure. No explanations, no official statements, just stop. 9 years of silence followed. 9 years of waiting stretched on. While the public insisted on resuming work and demanded further investigation, the Egyptian government decided to take the next step only in 2002. But it was carried out under the strictest control and with minimal publicity. This time, they sent in a robot equipped with a drill. It bored a hole in that very slab that came to be called Gantenbrink's door. Behind the first door, a second was found. The same limestone slab, the same copper pins. As if someone in the distant past had decided not to stop at a single barrier, one blocking slab was not enough. 2, 3, or even more were required. How many such barriers lie buried in the depths of the pyramid remains unknown. And the main question is, what exactly are they guarding? Official Egyptology offered the usual answer. These are merely ventilation shafts. Supposedly they were made to circulate air during construction. Nothing mystical, no secrets. But even a first-year architecture student would see the absurdity of such an explanation. Ventilation ducts are not closed by... They do not stop dead, ending a meter short of the pyramid's external face. These passages do not look like ventilation. They are more like corridors, leading to another space, to the world of the dead, and now let us descend deeper, literally downwards. Beneath the queen's chamber, under the very base of the pyramid, a shaft has been cut into the bedrock limestone at a depth of roughly 30 meters. It is a rectangular, roughly hewn channel that goes down at a steep angle. It is called the descending shaft, one of the most mysterious elements of the entire structure of Khufu's pyramid. It begins at the northern face and goes down at an angle of 26 degrees, leading to an underground chamber. This chamber is crudely carved, showing clear signs of unfinished work, and is officially regarded as incomplete. According to the accepted version, Khufu supposedly at first intended to be buried in the ground like his predecessors, but then changed his mind and ordered his tomb to be placed higher up, inside the pyramid itself. The underground chamber, according to this version, was simply left unfinished. If that is taken as the truth, then why are the walls of the underground chamber only partially finished? Why is one face smooth and neat, while the others remain rough, as if left incomplete. Why is the floor of this room cut by a deep pit, descending about 9 meters and seemingly leading to nowhere? Archaeologists call this hollow a sarcophagus pit, but there was never a sarcophagus there, and, judging by the size of the opening, there could not have been. It is too deep and at the same time too narrow to correspond to any known sarcophagus of that time. And the most remarkable thing about it is that it is unfinished. It seems as though the workers had been cutting the stone for a long time and then suddenly stopped when they ran into something that forced them to halt and leave the work unfinished. It is worth remembering the actions of those who came later. In 1837, the British Colonel Howard Vyse, obsessed with the idea of finding royal treasures, used dynamite to blow up part of the descending passage in the hope of discovering hidden chambers. The explosion did not lead to the hoped-for discovery. Instead, the sight of the masonry struck him to the core, and he recorded in his diary a conclusion that sounded like a confession of wounded professional pride. The stones were fitted so tightly that not even if construction plans had suddenly changed, it would have been more logical simply to fill in the cut corridors and move on. But here they acted differently. The shaft was not covered with earth. It was sealed with massive blocks. 3 heavy granite slabs blocked the ascending corridor, leading from the underground chambers to the upper chambers of the pyramid. Each of these slabs weighed roughly 50 tons. They are set in such a way that they are practically impossible to shift or remove by ordinary means. Such deliberate and sturdy sealing seems to send a clear message. What is below is meant to remain below. The first person to bypass these obstacles and reach the upper chambers was the Caliph Al-Ma'mun, an Arab ruler of the 9th century. He ordered a bypass tunnel to be cut through the limestone, avoiding the granite plugs. Workers labored and chipped at the rock for several months before they reached the desired path. When they finally broke through, they found only empty chambers. No treasures were found in the halls, nor the pharaoh's mummy that tales and legends might have led one to expect. The only remnant of former grandeur was bare stone walls, austere and cold. They were also struck by unusual acoustics. Voices sounded different, as if filled with a strange resonance and responding to some unknown frequencies. But Al-Ma'mun was a reasonable and prudent man. He did not dismiss the emptiness as mere coincidence. If the pyramid truly was empty, that meant one of two things. Either it had been emptied long before his time, or it had never contained treasure. From this springs an important question. Why build one of the most magnificent structures of antiquity if it was not intended for burial? There is a document dating to the 10th century, an Arabic manuscript by the historian Al-Masudi, in which he discusses the Giza pyramids. In his treatise, he claims that beneath the pyramids lie extensive underground complexes filled with magical talismans, strange mechanisms, and metal that does not rust. He also describes stones that glow in the dark and star charts marking constellations no longer visible from the surface of the earth. These accounts can be regarded as tales or legends, perhaps conjecture. Nevertheless, Al-Masudi lived in an era when Arab scholars were among the most enlightened on the planet and were laying the foundations of algebra, medicine, and astronomy. They did not record empty fabrications without, and there is one more detail in Al-Masudi's texts that is usually passed over in silence. In one of the fragmentary descriptions, he writes that, under the Great Pyramid, there are 30 chambers of colored granite, full of treasures and images of celestial bodies. Where are these rooms? Why has no archaeological expedition found them to date? A possible answer may be terrifyingly simple. No one has dug deep enough. In 1988, Japanese researchers from Waseda University carried out a series. Such techniques make it possible to detect voids, tunnels, and chambers hidden beneath the surface layer of soil and bedrock. The results of the research were astounding. The equipment recorded numerous anomalies under the Great Pyramid of Khufu and in its vicinity. The most striking aspect of these studies was that the discovered structure extends from the Great Pyramid of Khufu to the Sphinx. The Egyptian government immediately classified the research results. The Japanese specialists were forbidden to continue their work. The full data were not disclosed. Only a short report appeared in the scientific press, which, under pressure from official Egyptology, quickly faded and was forgotten. However, in 1993, there was a leak. One of the Japanese researchers anonymously handed the ground-penetrating radar maps to independent scholars. On these maps, the following is clearly visible. Beneath the Great Pyramid of Khufu, there exists a system of underground cavities connected by tunnels. Some of these tunnels descend vertically to depths exceeding 50 meters. Others run horizontally, extending underground for hundreds of meters toward neighboring monuments, including the Sphinx area. Official Egyptology explained these anomalies as natural karst caves in the limestone. However, the limestone of the Giza Plateau is not the type of rock in which large karst cavities normally form. Geologists confirm this. Moreover, natural voids typically do not take on the regular geometric outlines that are visible on the radar images. This is where the truly mysterious part of the story begins. Egyptologists generally date the Great Pyramid of Khufu to about 2560 BCE. This date is considered conventional. It is based on radiocarbon datings of charcoal and other organic remains. From the complex yield a range of dates from 3000 to 2000 BCE. That means a spread of roughly 1,000 years. By comparison, it would be like claiming the pyramids of Khufu are built mainly of stone. All organic traces found inside the pyramids are merely fragments of torches, charcoal, and pieces of wood. Those remains could have entered the structure long after its construction. Workers, casual visitors, and tomb robbers left such traces over many millennia. That is why using organics for precise chronology is often complicated. Finds are easily subject to later contamination. There is another astronomical dating method based on the orientation of internal passages. Narrow shafts were laid inside the pyramid, leading from the king's and queen's chambers at precisely defined angles. These channels are aligned with exact stellar directions. The southern shaft of the king's chamber points to Orion's belt. The northern shaft is aimed at Thuban, a star in the constellation Draco that served as the pole star in ancient Egyptian times. And here, if you calculate the positions of these stars relative to the shafts using modern astronomical programs, the perfect alignment occurs not in 2560 BCE, but roughly in 10,500 BCE, about 10,500 years ago. That was long before the conventional dating of the construction, and long before the flowering of Egyptian civilization. This discovery was made in the early 1990s by independent researchers Robert Bauval. According to the author's calculations, this correspondence is exact for the epoch around 10,500 BCE. Official Egyptology reacted dismissively to this hypothesis and labeled it pseudoscience. However, critics were unable to scientifically refute the astronomical calculations. Mathematics does not bend to preferred interpretations. The stars really were in the positions Bauval and Gilbert indicated. This circumstance left the key question unanswered. Does the coincidence mean that the pyramids were built 10,000 years ago? That is by no means the only possible conclusion. Perhaps the builders of Khufu's era consciously oriented themselves to the astronomical configuration of a distant past, and were recreating some ancient knowledge or symbolism. If so, another no less difficult question arises. Where did they get that knowledge? How could Bronze Age Egyptians, who had only recently developed writing, calculate the exact positions of the stars 8,000 years before their time? The only logical conclusion within the initial facts is this. They were not the originators of that astronomical knowledge. It was inherited by them from someone who lived much earlier. We are approaching one of the most explosive theories, which under certain circumstances could overturn conventional views of human history. Its essence is simple and at the same time staggering. What if the Great Pyramid was not built once but twice? The first erection took place in deep antiquity, before the last ice age, and belonged to an unknown civilization with technologies we still cannot explain. This civilization created a complex network of underground tunnels and chambers, excavated a system of passages and corridors whose purpose today can only be guessed. Many interpretations are possible. The pyramid might have served not as a tomb, but as a repository of knowledge, an observatory, an energy plant, or even a portal. In other words, something fundamentally different from what is commonly thought. Then a catastrophe occurred that changed the planet's climate and landscape within decades. About 11,000 years ago, an event took place that geologists call the Younger Dryas. The planet's climate sharply cooled. The temperature fell by roughly 10 degrees and then, just as suddenly, rose again. Glaciers melted and the world's sea level rose by 120 meters. Entire cultures and cities were simply washed away by waves and ice. Those who survived had time to flee to the mountains or hide deeper inland. Much of the ancient knowledge was lost, but a small group of survivors retained memories of the former order of the world. These people passed down legends, diagrams, and maps, fragments of which resurfaced over time. When, many centuries later, a new civilization familiar to us, ancient Egypt, arose on the banks of the Nile, echoes of that ancient information were at hand. Pharaoh Khufu may not have laid the pyramids. The underground parts, shafts, chambers, and complex passages, may have existed long before him, and he may simply have added the upper chambers, faced the pyramid with white limestone, and given it the familiar outward appearance. This version seems fantastical, and that is part of its attraction. Nevertheless, there are specific questions that this hypothesis helps to explain. Why is the style of stonework in the lower chambers so sharply different from the technique used in the upper chambers? Below we see rough, seemingly hurried or ancient work executed by different methods and tools. The upper chambers, by contrast, astonish with perfectly polished granite and joints fitted to tenths of a millimeter. Why are granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons each used in the king's chamber, brought from quarries in Aswan, roughly 800 kilometers upriver on the Nile? And finally, how could people of that era, lacking the wheel and iron tools, have managed to transport and set up such massive stones? Why is the sarcophagus in the king's chamber larger than the entrance to that chamber? That means it could not physically have been brought in after the pyramid was built. Therefore, the tomb must have been placed before the upper tiers were erected, and that, in turn, leads to an even more serious conclusion. The plan for the entire structure was drawn up in advance, before the main work began. Where could such precision have come from? Where were the drawings or calculations that accounted for the position of every block, every corridor, and every internal chamber? The ancient Egyptians left no papyrus describing in detail the construction of Khufu's pyramid. No depiction of the building process has survived. Inside the pyramid itself, there are no inscriptions like, "Here rests the great pharaoh Khufu." The interior holds only silence. The only direct indication of the ruler's name was found in the so-called relieving chambers above the king's chamber. There, Colonel Weiss discovered crude graffiti, a cartouche bearing the name Khufu. Nevertheless, many researchers doubt the authenticity of this inscription and consider it a 19th century forgery, possibly made by Weiss himself to justify the expedition's expenses and to confirm the pyramid's attribution to Khufu. Several arguments support such doubts. First, the graphic style of the hieroglyphs does not correspond to the style of the Fourth Dynasty. Second, the linguistic aspect of the inscription contains clear. Third, there were no mentions of such inscriptions before Weiss's arrival, although the relieving chambers had been examined earlier. If we discard this questionable evidence, no direct proof remains of Khufu's authorship. What then can on indirect sources, primarily the account of Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, about 2,000 years after the supposed construction. Herodotus relays the words of local priests that the pyramid was built by 100,000 workers over 20 years. Let us try to estimate the scale of the work based on this information. The Pyramid of Khufu consists of roughly 2.5 million stone blocks. On average, each block weighs about 2.5 tons. If one accepts the 20-year chronology, it turns out that 340 blocks had to be laid every day. This requirement applied daily. With no day, 340 blocks per day is roughly 14 blocks per hour. One block every 4 minutes, day and night, continuously, for 20 years. Imagine the scale of that work. It was not simply each block had to be dressed, given an exact shape, transported to the site, raised to a height reaching 146 meters, and set with millimeter precision. One must understand, this was a multi-stage, extremely precise and heavy operation from modern construction firms equipped with powerful cranes, trucks, laser levels, and computer designs would hardly be able to repeat this in 20 years. Even over 50 years, to carry it out at the same pace and with the same degree of precision would be incredibly difficult. There are many theories: ramps and inclined embankments, systems of levers and ropes, log rollers, and other mechanical contrivances. But none of these hypotheses answers the main question: how to raise a granite block weighing 80 tons to engineer Christopher Dunn, who worked for 30 years in the aerospace industry, conducted a detailed analysis of the Great Pyramid and reached an impressive conclusion. The builders used machine-based stone processing technologies. According to him, the blocks bear tool marks that do not correspond to Bronze Age notions: traces of circular saws with uniform teeth, drill holes showing signs of ultrasonic processing. Dunn set out his ideas in the book The Giza Power Plant, where he proposed a radical interpretation. The Great Pyramid was not an ordinary tomb, but a gigantic mechanism for producing energy. In his view, the underground chambers and passages served as pipelines for gases, and the king's chamber acted as a resonator, converting vibrations into electrical energy. It sounds incredible, but he supported his theory with mathematical calculations. According to Dunn, the acoustic properties of the king's chamber are unique. It resonates at 432 Hz, the very frequency many consider universal, supposedly corresponding to the fundamental vibrations of matter. When certain tones are played inside the chamber, its walls begin to vibrate, and the granite blocks seem to come alive. Researchers conducting acoustic experiments have noted a strange, hard-to-describe sensation, a sign that these spaces are connected to something more than just stone corridors. The room seemed alive, as if it had its own breathing rhythm, faint and strangely familiar. Recall the copper rods in Gantenbrink's door. Copper has long been known as an excellent conductor of electricity. If one allows that the pyramid was not merely a monument but an energy installation, those rods could easily have served as electrical electrodes. What then lay behind that door? Perhaps there was a chamber with some device that either produced or stored energy. This is where the boldest, almost fantastical hypotheses begin. Some researchers suggest that ancient civilizations knew how to use pyramid energy for wireless others advance even more exotic versions. In their view, the pyramids might have served as portals to other dimensions or even other worlds. Still others maintain that the pyramids were generators of a protective field intended to prevent another global catastrophe. What unites all these theories, so different in detail, is one key claim: it never was. The structure had a completely different function, one we are not yet fully able to understand. The most weighty evidence of this, according to some accounts, is hidden underground. It concerns underground tunnels, the existence of which the Egyptian government has kept secret for 80 years. The reason for the silence is simple and disturbing. In 1945, according to certain sources, something was in the archives of the Cairo Museum, it is said. There is a document to which only a few have access. It is a report by the French archaeologist Émile Besson, dated August 1945. Besson led a small expedition that the Egyptian authorities quietly permitted to explore the underground structures of the Pyramid of Cheops. The permission was issued quietly. The world had just endured a war, and governments had other, more. Besson and his team descended into an underground chamber and began to examine the pit in its floor. The shaft, 9 meters deep, officially considered unfinished. They worked with ropes, lamps, and primitive drilling equipment. At a depth of approximately 8 meters, the team encountered an obstacle, a massive stone slab blocking further passage. Besson ordered the slab to be blown with a small charge. The explosion rang out in the confined space, and the shockwave nearly stunned the workers. When the smoke and dust gradually cleared, an unexpected sight opened before them. Behind the slab was a horizontal tunnel. The tunnel had been cut directly into the bedrock and had a low height that forced one to stoop, about 1.5 meters. The walls were damp and coated with some kind of mineral deposits that emitted a faint greenish glow in the dark. Besson described the phenomenon as phosphorescence of unknown origin. They advanced about 30 meters. At first, the passage ran strictly horizontal, then began to slope downward at a slight angle. Either because the space warmed or more likely because they were moving deeper, the air temperature dropped and fell to 15 degrees. Humidity rose noticeably, reaching 90%, and breathing became more difficult. After 40 meters, a chamber opened up before them. Besson characterized it as a rectangular room approximately 8 by 10 meters. The ceiling rose about 4 meters above the floor. The floor was paved with slabs of black basalt, polished to a mirror sheen. In the center of the room stood a structure he could only call an altar or a pedestal. It was a rectangular block of red granite, 2 by 3. The cylinder was 1.5 meters long and about 30 centimeters in diameter. Its surface was covered with signs that did not fit into any known writing system. Besson's attempts to photograph the find were unsuccessful. All the plates came out overexposed, as if subjected to a strong. The symbols on the cylinder did not resemble Egyptian hieroglyphs or any other ancient script. They were combinations of geometric shapes, circles, triangles, spirals, and wavy lines, joined into complex patterns. Some researchers who saw the sketches noted that the signs more closely resembled electronic circuit diagrams or mathematical formulas. At first, Besson tried to move the massive cylinder from the pedestal, but it proved not simply heavy. It would not yield to the efforts of several people. Given its dimensions, its weight must have been measured in several hundred kilograms, and the team was physically unable to lift or shift it. The leader then ordered a detailed inspection of the rest of the chamber to determine whether anything else was concealed there. Carved panels ran along the walls, with images Besson described as star maps. The constellations' configurations on them were different from those known today. Nearby were depictions of mechanisms, gears, levers. All these drawings gave the simultaneous impression of antiquity and precise technical schematics, but their meaning could not be explained. The most unexpected thing was in the far corner of the room. In a niche set into the wall lay 7 small stone boxes, tightly closed with lids. Besson opened one of them and found scrolls inside. They were neither papyrus nor parchment. They were thin, flexible. Texts were engraved on those sheets, the same mysterious symbols as on the cylinder. Besson decided to take one scroll to the surface for further study and ordered the other boxes to be left untouched until conservators of ancient artifacts arrived. The team left the chamber. When the expedition members emerged on the surface, something incredible happened. Everyone who had descended into the tunnel felt severe malaise, nausea, dizziness, and general weakness. 2 of them began to have nosebleeds. Besson at first attributed this to lack of oxygen and possible poisoning by underground gases and sent the team to a Cairo hospital. Medical examination revealed clear signs of mild radiation sickness in all of them, reduced white blood cell counts, and signs of damage to bone marrow cells consistent with radiation exposure. The question arose, where could radiation have come from in an underground chamber beneath a pyramid? In 1945, there were no nuclear power plants or radioactive waste. The only known sources of powerful radiation at that time were atomic bombs. And the first of those bombs exploded in Hiroshima just 2 weeks before Besson's expedition set out. The Egyptian authorities immediately classified the excavation site. The entrance to the tunnel was sealed with a concrete plug. Besson and his team were strongly prohibited from disclosing what they had seen. The scroll that Besson had taken from the chamber was confiscated. Besson himself died in 1952 of leukemia, a disease regarded as a typical consequence of radiation exposure. Before his death, he managed to hand his notes and sketches to a colleague. That colleague later anonymously published fragments of the report in a little-known archaeological journal. The publication was immediately dismissed as a forgery, and the journal soon ceased to exist. But the story did not end there. In 1997, British engineer Wayne Herschel gained access to Besson's unpublished materials through a collector who had bought the archive of one of the expedition members. Herschel carefully analyzed the sketches of the symbols from the cylinder and came to a startling conclusion. These signs were not a script at all. It was a map. More precisely, a star map. It marked the locations of star systems in a sector of space roughly 300 light-years from Earth. At the center of the map was a star labeled Zeta Setki in the constellation Setka. Around it were marked several planetary systems, connected by lines that could be interpreted as routes or links between them. Herschel overlaid that map on modern astronomical catalogs and discovered an incredible coincidence. All the stars marked on the map really exist. Moreover, some of them are located in the so-called habitable zone, at such a distance from their sun that liquid water, and therefore life, is theoretically possible. A reasonable question arises. Could the ancient creators of the map really have known about the existence of these stars? However, the answer is complicated by the fact that the constellation Reticulum is visible and the star Zeta Reticuli is only of fourth magnitude and is barely discernible to the naked eye even under ideal observing conditions. At the same time, it is officially believed that the ancient Egyptians did not even have primitive telescopes. Where could the ancients have obtained precise coordinates of stars located hundreds of light years from Earth? The only sane conclusion is that they did not possess such information as part of a heritage acquired through local civilizational development. From those who left metal cylinders with maps of the starry sky, from those who came from one of those distant stars. It sounds like a science fiction plot, and yet it is precisely this version. It gained wide attention beginning in the 1960s, after the publication of Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. The scientific community received these ideas with irony. Daniken was called a charlatan and a fantasist. At the same time, no direct refutations of his individual arguments have been offered. Many of his claims rely on facts that are difficult to explain within traditional historical frameworks. Take, for example, the Sumerians, who lived roughly 5,000 years ago. How could they have known about the existence of all the planets of our solar system, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which were officially discovered only in the 19th and 20th centuries? On ancient Sumerian cylindrical seals, one finds images resembling a model of the solar system, with 12 celestial bodies. There, the sun, the moon, and 10 planets are visible. Among them, some unknown planet located between Mars and Jupiter. The Sumerians called it Nibiru. Modern astronomers still debate the existence of the so-called Planet X, a hypothetical large body on the outskirts of our system. Perhaps the Sumerian tradition preserves echoes of knowledge about such an object. Another example is the depiction of gods in ancient Egyptian art. They are often shown with elongated skulls, large eyes, and unusual body proportions, not typical of ordinary human appearance. Official Egyptology tends to explain this as artistic stylization. Egyptian art itself, however, is known for its realism. Pharaohs, priests, and workers are depicted with high anatomical accuracy. So why, then, do the divine figures appear so unusual? Could this mean they actually looked different? Supporting these strange details, in 2014, a collection of skulls dated to the Old Kingdom era was discovered in the storerooms of the Cairo Museum. 17 skulls were found with clear dolichocephaly and a noticeable elongation of the occipital region. The cranial capacity of these finds exceeded the norm by 30%, and this did not resemble the traces of artificial deformation that some ancient peoples deliberately practiced. Genetic analysis revealed that the skull bones were thicker and denser than those of an ordinary person, and the internal structure differed significantly from familiar anatomy. Mitochondrial DNA testing of one of the samples produced a startling result. Mitochondrial markers were found that were unknown to modern science and did not match any currently extant human populations. The results were classified. The skull was returned to the storeroom, and further research was prohibited. Nevertheless, the information leaked out. The geneticist who conducted the analysis shared it anonymously. According to him, it was the DNA of a humanoid, but by no means fully human. It resembled a mixture of Homo sapiens with some other component. What exactly that was remains an open question. Perhaps an ancient race that inhabited Earth before us. Or perhaps aliens who interbred with humans, leaving hybrid offspring. In Egyptian mythology, there is the concept of the Neteru, gods who descended from the heavens and ruled Egypt in early times. According to the Turin Papyrus, an ancient document from the New Kingdom period, these beings governed the land thousands of years before the first pharaohs appeared. The papyrus lists their names and specifies lengths of reign. Some ruled for 400. What if there really were beings with lifespans of hundreds of years, possessing knowledge and technologies far surpassing the capabilities of Bronze Age peoples? According to alternative theories, it was such beings who constructed a complex network of underground tunnels beneath Khufu's. They could have used the pyramid as a repository of knowledge, as a device for communication, as a beacon to attract their kin from space, or as a refuge in case of a global catastrophe. It is precisely for these purposes, proponents of the hypothesis suggest, that such deep and intricate underground systems were created beneath the pyramid. The chambers are sealed with massive granite blocks that cannot be moved, because whatever is hidden inside must remain preserved at any cost. This circumstance raises the most troubling question. What do the sections that researchers have not yet reached hide? Recall the ground-penetrating radar survey of 1988. It revealed multiple voids beneath the pyramid, but Besson's expedition found only one chamber. So the obvious question arises. In 2015, a team of French and Japanese physicists launched the Scan Pyramids project, a large-scale investigation of the Great Pyramid using muon tomography. The results, in addition to the already known cavity above the Grand Gallery, the instruments detected 3 more major anomalies. The first anomaly lies beneath the pyramid's northern face, at a depth of roughly 20 meters. Its dimensions are estimated at approximately 20 by 30 meters. The second is located beneath the eastern face, even deeper, at about 40 meters below the surface. Its volume is harder to estimate, but the data indicate it may surpass the subterranean chamber in size. The third, most mysterious cavity lies directly beneath the center of the pyramid at a depth of over 60 meters. According to preliminary assessments by specialists, it is a vast void comparable in area to a football field. A depth of 60 meters significantly exceeds that of any known internal structures within the pyramid and surpasses the expectations of even the boldest theorists. The same question remains. The Egyptian government refused permission to drill exploratory shafts. Officially, this was explained by the risk of damaging the monument's structural integrity. In unofficial discussions, another explanation is voiced. The fear that the authorities fear people will start asking uncomfortable questions and begin to doubt many things, and control over the version of the past often means control over the present. If history proves to be a lie, much will be called into question. Nevertheless, information is gradually leaking out. It's a pattern. Information always leaks somewhere. In 2018, one of the Scan Pyramids participants anonymously uploaded part of the muon scanning data to the internet. The posted image showed not just a void under the center of the pyramid, a clear structure was visible. It was a precise geometric configuration resembling a network of corridors radiating from a single central point. The image was removed within a few hours, and all copies, as far as is known, were erased from servers. The person who published the file was identified and fired from the project. The internet, however, remembers a lot. Copies of the image remain in the archives of several research forums, and I personally saw those materials. What struck me most was that the structure found does not look Egyptian in style or logic. It is too complex, too carefully thought out. It gives the impression that this is not a collection of random voids, but the plan of a grand underground complex designed using three-dimensional modeling. I should remind you, we are talking about a structure attributed an age of 4,500 years. A natural question arises. By what means could the ancient Egyptians have designed something like this? They did not have modern drafting instruments, they lacked developed mathematical models of three-dimensional space, and they had no knowledge of geology or structural mechanics necessary for laying stable, deep underground structures. The answer suggests itself. They hardly could have done it. That means the work was carried out by someone who came long before them, using technologies we can only guess at. And now consider one more thing. What if this underground system is still operational? It sounds incredible, I know, but let us rely on the facts. First fact, temperature anomalies are constantly recorded in the Pyramid of Cheops. Infrared scanning carried out in 2015 showed that some blocks at the base of the pyramid are about 3 to 4 degrees warmer than the surrounding ones. Where this heat comes from remains a question. Second fact, Local residents regularly report strange sounds coming from under the ground in the area of the pyramid complex. It is a low-frequency hum that can sometimes be heard at night. One Bedouin living near the Giza plateau described it as if a huge machine were operating underground. He also spoke of glowing spheres hovering above the summit and flashes of light that, he said, seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. Tourists regularly record these phenomena on video, but such footage is most often attributed to plays of light, reflections, and atmospheric effects. Fourth fact: plants growing in the immediate vicinity of the pyramid show abnormally accelerated growth. Some species grow about 30% larger than their counterparts, growing only a few kilometers from. It seems they receive some additional nourishing influence. All of these observations can be attempted to be explained by natural causes. Changes in temperature and increased solar heating could produce local thermal anomalies. Acoustic oscillations caused by underground waters or airflow in the voids can affect plants in the soil. Light effects are often credited to atmospheric phenomena and refraction. A particular soil composition and local chemical factors can also accelerate vegetation growth. Taken individually, each of these explanations makes sense and appears plausible. However, when you put all the observations together, a persistent sense arises that we are dealing with something more than just a set of independent phenomena. This impression suggests that the key to the mystery may be connected to. I recall Christopher Dunn's theory that the pyramid could have served as an energy installation. If there is some truth to this hypothesis, then somewhere there must be its energy source, along with associated generators, reactors, or converters. It is logical to assume that such devices would be located in the most protected part of the structure, deep underground, in that enormous chamber beneath the center of the pyramid. Moreover, Besson's expedition discovered a copper cylinder. If this object is viewed not as a simple artifact but as part of a complex control system, it could have been a control module regulating the operation of the underground installation. In that case, it also becomes clear why members of the expedition received a dose of radiation. They may have been exposed to emission from an operating mechanism. The idea that such a mechanism could have been functioning for millennia, fueled by energy of unknown origin, raises many questions. What kind of energy could it be? A conventional nuclear chain reaction seems unlikely, since a traditional nuclear reactor requires constant maintenance and periodic refueling and cannot run continuously for millennia without intervention. Thermonuclear energy looks more plausible in broad terms, but this option also generates serious questions and technical difficulties. So the mystery remains open, and it still requires thorough and cautious investigation. The ability to control a thermonuclear reaction is an achievement humanity only mastered in the 20th century, and even now we are not always able to reproduce or understand phenomena that might lie at the heart of ancient secrets. Perhaps it is something fundamentally different: vacuum energy, the power of gravitational fields, or the very properties of space-time. Nikola Tesla suggested there was a way to draw energy directly from the ether, from what modern physics calls the quantum vacuum. He believed one could build a device capable of extracting virtually unlimited amounts of energy from the surrounding space without consuming conventional fuel. Many of his contemporaries considered these ideas crazy, but later quantum physics confirmed the idea itself. The vacuum is not empty, it is full of energy. In the quantum picture, virtual particles are constantly born and immediately vanish, and this seething of fields is a reality described by theoretical models. Theoretically, given the ability to capture such energy, one could obtain a practically inexhaustible power source. A curious thought arises. What if they had created a device that actually extracted energy from the quantum vacuum? That could explain the observed anomalies: heat radiating from inside the structure, sounds, unusual plants. What could such energy have been used for? If it were only for lighting underground chambers, the expense of creating a complex system would seem disproportionate. It is far more plausible that the device had a more significant purpose. Perhaps it was a transmitter sending signals into space as a sign. Intelligent life exists here. There is a civilization. Perhaps it was a receiver, picking up messages from outside, from those who once built these structures and left. A darker version cannot be ruled out. The device could have served as a weapon or a defense system activated in the face of a threat, destroying attackers, forming a shield around the territory, or even opening something like a portal to another dimension. We do not have exact answers because access to the underground structures beneath the Great Pyramid of Khufu is closed and, it seems, will remain so for a long time. History has a habit of repeating itself, and mysteries tend to reveal their secrets only when their time comes. In 2008, an event occurred. A small group of amateur cave explorers from Cairo decided to study the network of natural caves beneath the Giza Plateau. Officially, they had obtained permission from local authorities to examine the subterranean water sources that feed the oases of the area. The team consisted of 6 people, and they descended into one of the known caves located about 1 kilometer southwest of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. This cave had been well known to the Bedouins for generations. In dry periods, they came here for water. Nevertheless, the deep and remote sections of the system had remained untouched and largely unexplored. The cavers walked about 200 meters along the main tunnel, after which they came upon a side passage hidden beneath a natural collapse. They cleared the rubble and continued deeper. The new passage ran to the northeast and passed directly under the foundation of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. At a depth of roughly 40 meters, the character of the cavities changed. The walls ceased to be uneven and natural and became smooth and worked. The tunnel ran strictly horizontally. Its width was about 2 meters, and its height just over 2 meters. The floor was covered with a thick layer of silt and mineral deposits, but beneath it a regular stone masonry could be made out. The walls bore traces of ancient tools, parallel grooves resembling the marks left by something like a circular saw. The team walked another roughly 100 meters along this tunnel and came to a door. It really was a door, a massive stone slab set into a doorway cut into the rock. Along the edges of the slab, remnants of bronze hinges were visible, traces of a mechanism that once allowed it to open and close. The hinges had rusted, and the slab was stuck in a half-open position, leaving a gap about 30 centimeters wide. Team leader Ahmed Farooq slipped a flashlight into the gap, and the illuminated beam picked out a small chamber from the darkness. Behind the door was a modest, cube-shaped chamber, roughly 5 by 5 meters, with a low ceiling. In the far wall of this chamber, another passage leading deeper underground could be seen. The speleologists squeezed through the narrow opening and found themselves inside. The air in the chamber was stale and humid, with a faint metallic tang. On the walls were engraved images covered with a greenish patina of oxides that clearly, according to him, they were not casual sketches but precise diagrams and plans. Before them lay geometric constructions and various diagrams, executed deliberately and unhurriedly. I did not understand their meaning, but at that moment I felt an inner tension and alarm. It was not merely art. It looked like an instruction, like a map or plan with a specific purpose. One of the sheets depicted a pyramid, however, it was not the kind of pyramid tourists are used to. In the drawing, the outline of the upper part was combined with an enormous subterranean section. Beneath the surface stretched a network of chambers and tunnels, extending down for dozens of meters, or some kind of energy source. Another drawing was devoted to the sky. It showed a star field, but the arrangement of the constellations seemed different, unfamiliar. Farooq, he said that before him was not a modern star chart, but a very ancient one. The constellations on it were in positions that had been observed thousands of years ago. The team carefully photographed these images and continued on. The next corridor sloped down steeply at an angle of about 40 degrees. The descent was difficult. They had to move slowly, clinging to protrusions in the walls, testing their footing before each step. The descent itself took about 20 minutes. At the bottom, they came into a large chamber. Farooq estimated its size at roughly 30 meters long and about 20 meters wide. The ceiling was lost in darkness. The light of the flashlights did not reach the upper vaults. In the center of the room rose a platform of black stone, raised about 1 meter above the floor. On this slab rested cylindrical objects of various calibers, from fist-sized to objects comparable to human height. One of the paleologists stepped closer to examine the finds. He reached out intending to touch one of the cylinders, and at that moment, everything changed. According to Foruk, first there was a low humming sound, a dense vibration. They began to light up one by one, rhythmically pulsing in time with the hum. The team was frightened. It was a natural reaction when encountering in an unfamiliar place something that clearly should not have been working after thousands of years of neglect. They dashed for the exit as if fleeing an unknown threat. The climb up the inclined tunnel seemed endless. Each step felt heavier than the last. Breathing quickened, time stretched. The hum grew louder, the light brighter. Foruk looked back and saw what they had not noticed before. From the depths of a chamber they hadn't had time to explore came something. Not a person, but something like a figure. Its movements were strange, oddly detached and mechanical, like a robot or an automaton. The spelunkers burst out of the tunnel, raced through the first chamber, and slipped through a narrow gap in the door. They ran back down the corridor without looking back, until they emerged into a natural cavern and finally came to the surface. It was already dawn. It turned out they had spent almost 8 hours underground, while they themselves felt no more than 2. Foruk insisted the find be reported to the authorities. The others resisted. They were gripped by fear of what they had seen, of being thought mad, of the possibility that the discovery would be immediately classified, and the researchers forced to keep quiet or even arrested for illegal entry into a restricted area. In the end, the team decided to keep the secret. Still, Foruk could not shake what he had seen. A week later, he returned alone to the cave entrance, intending to descend again and check, to make sure he had not hallucinated. But the entrance had been sealed. Someone had quickly and roughly but securely blocked the opening with concrete blocks. There was no way through without heavy machinery. Foruk began questioning the locals. It turned out that the day after their expedition, a government commission had indeed come to the area. Several jeeps, people in military uniforms. They spent a few hours at the cave and then left, and the entrance had been sealed. How had they learned of the intrusion? Who had informed them? The only explanation left was that they had been tracked. Perhaps there were sensors in the subterranean chamber that registered an outside presence and sent a signal. Or maybe one of the figures Foruk had seen was not a mechanism after all, but a guard, an automated security system that notified someone of the intrusion. But who exactly, the Egyptian government or someone else, remained a mystery. There are rumors of a secret organization that watches over the pyramids and guards their hidden secrets. Foruk tried to squeeze answers from that mystery. He reached out to archaeologists, historians, even journalists in the hope that someone would be interested in his version of events. But he could not find anyone willing to listen. He was accused of fabrications, of seeking fame, and the stories about underground mechanisms and glowing cylinders were dismissed as nonsense and fantasy. In 2011, against the backdrop of political unrest in Egypt, Foruk disappeared. His relatives filed a missing person report with the police, but the investigation produced no results, and officially he is listed as missing. That formal entry did not answer the question of what had really happened. However, one of the participants in his speleological expedition, a man named Karim Zaki, told me the whole story in 2019. We happened to meet in a cafe in Cairo. Learning that I studied the underground structures beneath the man was visibly frightened. He kept looking over his shoulder, spoke quietly, in a whisper, although there were almost no people around. According to Zaki, Foruk did not vanish on his own. He was taken because he talked too much. He saw late one evening people in plain clothes approach Foruk, shove him. When I asked why he hadn't gone to the police, Zaki smirked and replied briefly, "Do you think the police don't know? The police? They were that very car, or it was the army, or someone who controls both the police and the army." Zaki showed me copies of photographs taken in the underground chamber. The images were poor quality, an old film camera, weak lighting, and trembling hands. Nevertheless, the drawings on the walls and a platform with cylinders are discernible. I showed these shots to several experts, an engineer, an archaeologist, and a physicist. They all reached the same conclusion. This is impossible. Such constructions could not have been made in ancient times. It is either a forgery or a modern. He claimed he himself had been in that underground chamber, had touched the walls and the cylinders, had heard a low hum, and had seen a flickering glow. Whom to believe? The eyewitness who risked his life for the truth? For example, a case described by Graham Hancock, the British journalist and alternative history researcher. In 1998, he gained access to the closed archives of the British Museum and came across documents dated to the 19th century. They turned out to be reports by British engineers involved in building a railway in Egypt. In one such report, dated 1876, an unusual incident is described in detail. Workers laying an underground tunnel near the pyramids encountered a sudden obstacle. The engineer ordered the barrier to be blown up so work could continue, and after the blast, a filled space was discovered behind the rubble. The report states that behind the wall, there was a rectangular chamber whose interior surfaces were covered with strange, inscrutable symbols. In the center of the room rested a cylindrical metal object that could not be immediately identified, about 2 meters long. Attempts to saw or cut this object with ordinary tools produced sparks that caused a fire, resulting in 2 workers being burned. However, the next day, the object had disappeared. Officially, it was explained that it had been stolen, but logical questions remained. Who could have silently stolen a heavy metal cylinder weighing several hundred kilograms, especially under the guard of a construction crew? It was far more plausible to suppose that someone had taken the object out officially and deliberately left no records. That is, a person or group with sufficient power to order the incident kept secret. Hancock tried to trace the story further in other archives and came across a reference to the creation, in the late 19th century, of a secret committee on the study of Egyptian artifacts within the British government. The committee's membership and its tasks were classified. The only thing that could be established for certain was that the committee worked until the 1920s, after which its activities were concealed. All documents related to the committee's work were either destroyed or classified for 100 years. From the time of its disbanding, that meant the materials should have become available around 2020. Hancock filed an official request for declassification. He was denied. The official reason was national security. How should this decision be understood? What could be so dangerous in archives a century old that concern ancient artifacts? Perhaps these documents contain information still regarded as extremely risky. Perhaps they describe technologies capable of shifting the balance of power in the world. Or perhaps the records contain the truth about the origin of human civilization. That truth might contradict established religious dogmas, accepted historical narratives, and the beliefs on which the current social order rests. What if we are not the first? What if other civilizations once existed on this planet, far more advanced than us, and then vanished as a result of catastrophe? What if the pyramids are not merely monuments, but barely preserved traces of former power? The last witnesses, the best known of them, the death of the dinosaurs, occurred roughly 65 million years ago. But in the past, there have also been other, more recent cataclysms. About 11,700 years ago, the planet experienced a sudden and ice sheets that had begun to melt expanded again. Sea level fluctuated, and the climate became unstable and changeable. What caused this? The official explanation runs like this. Melting ice sheets, a reorganization of oceanic flows, usually takes centuries, not mere decades. Among alternative explanations, another version is gaining popularity. An asteroid or comet may have struck the Earth. The impact was so powerful that vast amounts of dust and debris were lofted into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and producing an effect comparable to a nuclear winter. What evidence supports this hypothesis? In soil layers corresponding to the time of the Younger Dryas microscopic diamonds, glass spherules and metal nanoparticles have been found. These phenomena are commonly associated with high-energy cosmic impacts. Traces of simultaneous, large-scale fires from the same period have been discovered in many different parts of the globe. It seemed as if the entire planet had burst into flame at the same moment. If that is true, we are dealing with a catastrophe on a global scale. It destroyed a significant portion of life on Earth. Human civilization may also have suffered, if one existed then in its former form. Suppose the pyramids were built not for decorative or ritual purposes, but as shelters against such a disaster. What if the ancients knew of an approaching celestial body, of an impact that could not be avoided? In that case, they might have created deep underground complexes designed to survive a prolonged nuclear winter. Subterranean chambers could have served as refuges and bunkers, and a network of tunnels as evacuation routes and lines of. Inside such structures, power installations could have provided heat and light during the long years when the surface remained dark and inhospitable. Perhaps part of the population was saved by taking refuge in the depths of these constructions. People waited until the climate began to come back into balance, until the air became breathable again, until the soil regained its fertility. When conditions reached an acceptable level, the survivors emerged to the surface and set about rebuilding the wreckage of the previous culture. Instead of detailed reports and schematics, there remained legends of gods descending from the sky, of great teachers who taught people agriculture, writing, and construction. These gods may have been nothing more than survivors from the pre-catastrophe civilization, the keepers of lost knowledge. They gave people what they could, taught crafts, passed on accumulated wisdom, and restored surviving technologies as best they could. But much had been irreparably destroyed and could not be rebuilt. Over time, those who carried the knowledge of generations left, they died, leaving only memories and mysterious stone structures that long confounded ideas about the past. One such structure is, for example, the Pyramid of Cheops, with its underground passages. But do these mechanisms work as intended now? Or are we seeing only the effects of slowly waning energy trapped in ancient constructions? Perhaps it is this residual energy that causes local temperature anomalies, luminous phenomena, and unexplained. Perhaps they are waiting for a signal, waiting for the moment when someone will set them in motion again. And what would happen if the signal came and the mechanisms were fully activated? It is hard to predict, but the thought is unsettling. In December 2019, I received a strange letter with no return address and no signature. Inside were a flash drive and a note with 3 short lines. If you want to know the truth about the pyramids, watch this. But be careful. Not everyone wants the truth to be known. The flash drive contained a single file. It was a video dated November 2017. The recording quality was mediocre. From the image characteristics, it was clear the footage had been shot on a mobile phone or a handheld camera. The clip lasted. Heavy intermittent breathing could be heard in the background. Steps echoed on the stone floor, their sound reverberating down the tunnel. After a few seconds, a weak beam from a flashlight entered the frame, and a voice speaking Arabic could be heard off-screen. I found a translator who helped decipher what was being said. The person behind the camera kept repeating, "We are at a depth of 38 meters." He specified the direction, to the northeast of the center. He then noted, "The temperature has dropped to 12 degrees." He also spoke of a critical humidity level. The camera began to shake in his hands. It was audible that the operator was nervous. He walked further along the corridor, and the tunnel gradually widened. Parallel grooves began to appear on the walls, marks from a cutting tool. Modern archaeologists, the recording said, are unable to explain how the ancient Egyptians could have carved such lines with such precision. Suddenly, the passage opened into a chamber. It was small, roughly 8 by 10 meters, and it wasn't hard to take in the whole space at a glance. In the center stood an ordinary metal table, clearly a modern object among the ancient walls. On the table were instruments, monitors, some sensors and cables running into the floor. The camera lingered on the monitor screen. A waveform pulsed across the display at an even frequency. In the corner of the screen, numbers glowed, 432.17 hertz. This frequency, the off-screen voice noted, matched the resonance of the pharaoh's chamber. The tone of the voice changed. It took on a frightened note. The operator whispered that they are here, that they have been here all this time, that they are watching and taking measurements. Suddenly, the camera jerked violently. The person judging by the footage turned and ran back down the tunnel. The filming became chaotic. Walls flashed by, Fragments of floor, stretches of total darkness. Arabic shouts were heard on the tape, followed by harsh commands in a different tone. Mumbled but distinct were the words, "Stop! Hands on your head!" After that, the video abruptly cuts off. I spent several months trying to establish the identity of the operator and to find the person who had sent me the flash drive. Those attempts yielded no result. I showed the recording to several video analysis experts. All the specialists reached the same conclusion. This footage is not a forgery. The recording is genuine. The obvious inference follows. There really is some secret laboratory, but why is there such a veil of secrecy around it? If research is indeed being carried out on the pyramidal structure, why isn't it announced openly? Why hide a laboratory deep underground at a depth of 40 meters? Or perhaps this work is not being done by the state. Maybe a private organization is behind it, a corporation, or a military contractor. Those who need the technologies allegedly contained in the ancient structures. Those who would be willing to kill to preserve a monopoly on such knowledge. And now I suggest considering another observation. In the 20th century, there was an astonishing technological leap. In 100 years, humanity went from steam engines to computing machines and digital networks. Only 66 years passed from the Wright brothers' first flight to the moon landing. It took 50 years to go from the first room-sized computer to the pocket-sized smartphone. One can call this the natural development of technology. But one cannot help asking, was there not someone's help in this acceleration? Could someone have provided knowledge and tools that significantly sped up the course of progress? There is a theory that after the war, the governments of the leading powers gained access to ancient artifacts containing technical information. People speak of objects discovered in Egypt, Iraq, and South America. Allegedly, these finds were used as the basis for the creation of a number of modern technologies. Sounds like a conspiracy theory? Maybe it is. Why did a real boom in scientific and technological discoveries begin precisely after the war? Why did the champions of the new era turn out to be those countries that had access to archaeological excavations in the Middle East? The United States, Great Britain, and why were they the ones to lead the space race and the development of computing? Coincidence? Or the result of reverse engineering ancient devices? The engineer Christopher Dunn, mentioned earlier, conducted. These vases were turned from hard rocks such as granite, basalt, and diorite. They exhibit perfect symmetry and very thin walls, 2 or 3 millimeters thick. Dunn measured them with a modern laser scanner. The result showed manufacturing accuracy to 1/100th of a millimeter. That kind of precision today is typically achieved on CNC machines. And then the logical question arises, how could ancient craftsmen, who did not even have iron tools, it would have been impossible to work granite with bronze chisels simply by using sand and water. That is physically untenable. Granite is among the hardest rocks on Earth. On the Mohs scale, it has a hardness of 7, whereas bronze, a soft metal, cannot effectively cut a much harder material. The text contains the mysterious phrase bronze laser, and nearby mentions ultrasonic drilling technology, which people only mastered in the 20th century. It is these kinds of technologies, Dunn says, that he found in Egypt. In the Aswan quarries, from which granite for the pyramids was taken, there lies the so-called unfinished obelisk, a huge rock mass 42 meters long that ancient workers began carving directly out of. Even more curious is that tool marks appear on the outer surface of this block, and these marks do not resemble the work of copper or bronze chisels. There are parallel grooves, evenly spaced, about 5 millimeters deep. It gives the impression that the stone was cut with a circular saw with teeth of a certain pitch. Dunn calculated that to produce such grooves, the tool would have had to rotate at a speed of at least 500 revolutions per minute and have teeth coated with diamond. Modern saws with such characteristics exist, but in the era 4,500 years ago, nothing like them, according to accepted views, existed. From this follows the question remains open. Did they create these instruments themselves, or receive them from someone outside, perhaps from aliens from distant stars? It is for this reason that attention once again turns to the underground chambers beneath the pyramids of Cheops. Such instruments could be stored there, and there might be a library of the form. Recall the Egyptian priest Maniphon, who lived in the 3rd century BCE. In his History of Egypt, he mentioned the Books of Thoth, 42 sacred texts that allegedly contained all the world's knowledge. According to legend, these books were hidden in a secret refuge to protect them from the ignorant and the barbarians. Many researchers believe that such a refuge could have been the spaces beneath the pyramids, for the pyramids were considered the most reliable, and if the ancients sought to preserve something forever, they usually hid it in the most protected and inaccessible places. But the Books of Thoth are a very different kind of treasure. According to the traditions, they were not carved on parchment or papyrus, but on metal plates. The text was written in a language that does not match any of the languages preserved to us. The contents of these scrolls are described as a compendium of knowledge on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, alchemy, and magic. When you hear the word magic, you immediately think of something supernatural, inexplicable, and violating the usual laws of nature. However, for the ancients, the notion of magic could have meant not mysticism, but simply a technology they did not possess and did not understand. Any sufficiently advanced technology becomes Clarke's law famously states. Thus, if people from the distant past saw a man with a lantern, they might call its owner a wielder of light magic. If a flying craft appeared before them, they would describe it as a chariot of the gods. And devices resembling a radio or a computer could be perceived as a talking stone or a mirror showing distant places. Now imagine what technologies a civilization capable of building the pyramids might have had. If they were able to lift blocks weighing 80 tons to heights of about 50 meters, that implies a high level of engineering skill. If they knew the precise positions of the stars long before their time, that speaks to deep astronomical knowledge. Therefore, it cannot be ruled out that such a civilization might have possessed flying machines, fuel-free energy sources, and long-distance means of communication. It is also quite possible that they had medical technologies allowing people to live for hundreds of years, or perhaps even freeing them from. But no more incredible than the claim that supposedly primitive Bronze Age craftsmen erected one of the most perfect structures of antiquity, relying only on copper tools and ropes. What is even more surprising is that the ancient texts themselves corroborate such notions. Their records repeatedly feature themes of immortality, gods who do not age, and pharaohs seeking the elixir of eternal life. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical compilations, dated to the 16th century BCE, contains recipes described as remedies for rejuvenating the body and restoring youth. The ingredients in these recipes seem unusual: certain minerals, plants that are now difficult to identify, and water taken from a sacred spring located beneath the Great Mountain. Beneath the Great Mountain. That is exactly how those words leave a sense of mystery and suggest that what seems to us like myth was for the ancients an everyday matter. The pyramid was often called a mountain, and the image of a sacred spring beneath it is partly related to the presence of ground. Geological studies do indeed indicate the existence of entire underground rivers beneath the pyramid masses. These flows are fed by the Nile and by filtration through sandy layers, forming a complex network of water channels at depths of 20 to 100 meters below the plateau surface. A reasonable question arises. Why is this water considered sacred? Isn't it just ordinary groundwater? The answer is complicated by the results of a field study carried out in 2003 by a group of Japanese scientists who sampled water from underground sources beneath Giza. Chemical analysis revealed an abnormally high content of certain metals, gold, silver, and platinum, at concentrations uncharacteristic of typical groundwater. In addition, the water displayed unusual electromagnetic. The researchers suggested that the water interacts with deposits of rare metals or is subjected to weak radiation that alters its molecular structure. Then the question arises, where under the pyramids could such a source of radiation come from? The only logical hypothesis the authors allow is that beneath the ground there is something artificial, a device that has been operating for many millennia and imbuing the water with energy. Recall Besson's story when his team received a dose of radiation in an underground chamber. Radiation and electromagnetic emissions are related, and if an ancient reactor or generator did indeed function beneath the pyramid, it could have emitted both. However, the idea of a mechanism operating without maintenance for 4,500 years contradicts ordinary laws of physics, since any mechanism wears out and energy sources are depleted. There is one exception. If the mechanism is not mechanical in the usual sense at all, but crystalline, there is a theory that the pyramids essentially functioned as giant crystalline structures. Crystals can store energy, resonate at certain frequencies, and create electric fields. Quartz crystals are used in modern electronics, from watches to computers. Granite, a rock rich in quartz, fits such a hypothesis as a possible material explaining some observed phenomena. The walls, floor, and ceiling are all covered with pink Aswan granite with a high quartz content. An engineer named Dan conducted a series of electromagnetic field measurements inside that chamber. He discovered that at certain sound frequencies, the granite blocks themselves begin to generate a weak electric current. Thus, the chamber not only receives vibrations, it amplifies them and converts mechanical energy into electrical. Where do these vibrations come from, he asked himself. Dan hypothesized that the source is underground. The Earth itself is constantly vibrating. This is a scientific fact. Seismic waves continually pass through the crust and create persistent oscillations. If there is indeed some structure beneath the pyramid capable of capturing and directing these earth tremors upward into the king's chamber, then the pyramid becomes a generator powered by the planet. It's almost a perpetual motion machine. As long as the earth exists and vibrates, the pyramid could function. When all these observations are put together, a different picture of the functions of the subterranean rooms emerges. Underground chambers may be not merely hiding places or storage rooms, but part of a single energy system. They contain certain device concentrators that collect energy from earth vibrations, from the depths, from the rock itself. Energy collected in this way is carried up special channels and ventilation shafts to the upper rooms, where it resonates and is further amplified. The copper pins in the door, discovered by Gantenbrink, are by no means. These pins pick up part of the energy and channel it into a yet unopened chamber where, possibly, the main accumulator or transmitter is located. What it transmits, electricity, cosmic signals, or some other kind of energy, remains. Physicist John Hutchison, known for his experiments with electromagnetic fields, suggested that the pyramids could also have been used to create anti-gravity effects. He showed that with a certain combination of electromagnetic frequencies, if the ancients really knew how to create such a field inside a pyramid, it would have allowed them to greatly ease the lifting and moving of multi-ton blocks. Such a mechanism would explain how the construction of such massive structures was possible with the technologies known to us. If we allow that anti-gravity technology once existed, it is reasonable to suppose that it was used not only to hold objects in place, but also for moving through the air. Ancient sources preserve descriptions of flying platforms, devices that in shape and purpose resemble what myths call the chariots of the gods or firebirds. It sounds fantastical, but the images in surviving reliefs and wall paintings can indeed be read as depictions of flying craft. On the ceiling of one of the corridors of the Temple of Wobodos hieroglyphs were found whose shapes strike. On the stone one can make out the silhouettes of a helicopter, an airplane, and even a submarine carved 3,000 years ago. Modern Egyptologists usually explain these motifs as the result of palimpsests. The superimposition. Nevertheless, many researchers consider such an explanation insufficient, because the images are too clear and detailed to be a mere accidental mixture. If this really is not an accident, who created these images and why? Were they gods in the traditional sense, or representatives of some ancient civilization that built extensive underground complexes beneath the pyramids? Let us return to the star map discovered during Bessin's expedition. It marks the so-called Zeta Setki, the star to which this ancient plan points. This star is a binary system and lies 39 light-years from Earth. Astronomers suppose that planets may be present in this system, and one of them is potentially. Other interpretations are possible. It could be a message along the lines of, "We came from there, we will return there," or "You can follow our tracks." But even if the hidden meaning of the map implies interstellar travel, moreover, the laws of physics indicate that reaching the speed of light for a material object is impossible, since that would require an infinite supply of energy. There is, however, another concept for overcoming This involves creating connections between distant points of spacetime, so-called wormholes or portals. Modern theories allow for the possibility of such tunnels in spacetime, which in principle could connect two far-apart points. Theoretically, with an artificially created wormhole, travel between those points becomes instantaneous. The practical implementation of this idea is extraordinarily difficult, because stabilizing and opening a portal would require matter with negative mass, which does not exist in nature. It would be necessary to be able to control gravity at a level our civilization has not yet approached. Yet what if for aliens from the so-called Z-grid, such technologies are no problem at all? What if they long ago mastered the art of bypassing these constraints and deliberately used the pyramids as gates between worlds? Then much becomes understandable. Why the pyramids are perfectly oriented to the stars, and why the shafts inside them point to specific stellar positions. Why powerful energy installations might be located at the base. All of this would be required not for rituals or burials, but for opening a passage, colossal energy, and exquisitely precise tuning to the coordinates of the destination are needed. In that light, the pyramid ceases to be a tomb and becomes a gate, in the literal sense, a stargate. Perhaps that is why modern authorities guard the underground tunnels beneath the necropolis so carefully. If a working portal has indeed been preserved there, its unpredictable activation could lead to catastrophic consequences. Who would appear on the other side? The creators of the portal, or something that has been languishing in wait for thousands of years? At that time, the Egyptian army conducted secret exercises in the Giza Plateau area, officially called anti-terrorist maneuvers. Local residents, however, related different details. According to them, soldiers cleared the area around the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Heavy equipment was brought into the underground galleries, and late at night several military trucks sped out from there. One neighbor claimed he saw a bluish pulsating glow breaking through the ground from a crack in the rocks. The next day, the military left the area, and tourist access was forbidden for a week under the pretext of urgent restoration work. When the area was reopened, one of the entrances to the underground tunnels was found sealed with fresh concrete. What exactly happened there? What exactly the military found or perhaps activated? And whether they managed to deal with the problem or simply sealed it up in the hope it would not reappear? I tried to obtain documents on these exercises through official channels. All my requests were denied. Officially, the materials were classified and placed under restriction for reasons of national security. Nevertheless, one former serviceman, insisting on anonymity, agreed to speak with me. He did not personally take part in those operations, but he heard some quite alarming conversations from colleagues. According to his account, one of the teams went down into one of the underground tunnels and simply never came back. Another team was sent to search for them. Those people returned, but 3 of them were in such a state that they could not coherently tell anything. Soon, all 3 were taken to a military hospital. The diagnosis was brief and unambiguous: acute psychological trauma. After their discharge, they were sent to serve in remote garrisons and received a strict verbal order never to discuss what they had seen. Their families were paid compensation, although no bodies were found. One can only guess what exactly happened to them. Did they get lost in the network of tunnels and die of lack of air? Or did they encounter something else? Something that still dwells in the depths beneath the pyramid? There are ideas that the scientific community prefers to speak of cautiously, or not at all. One of them is the concept of parallel dimensions. Quantum physics suggests that our reality may not be the only one. Other levels of space, other frequencies of being may exist, coexisting with our world without intersecting it until some kind of passage appears. What if the pyramids are not just ancient structures, but a kind of gateway between such? That could explain why witnesses described them as not entirely material, and why these creatures appeared and disappeared suddenly. A camera, capturing only our frequency of reality, simply cannot pick up what exists outside it, which is why photographs often fail. It was the world of the dead, the path supposedly taken by the soul after departing life. Modern Egyptologists usually view Upuaut as a metaphor or a religious symbol. But what if this image is not a pure allegory, but a reference to a real place. There is an idea of another dimension, access to which is supposedly hidden beneath the Earth's crust, beneath the pyramids. Ancient texts depict Duat as a place shrouded in darkness and full of dangers, where the soul must pass through a series of trials and encounter strange inhabitants. These descriptions include encounters with creatures and overcoming obstacles, and it is easy to see a parallel with the network of underground tunnels and passages. Doesn't that sound like a description of subterranean labyrinths? The Book of the Dead, that ancient Egyptian collection of texts placed in the tombs of rulers, was not only a religious compendium, it can be seen as a practical guide, instructions for navigating the Duat. It contains a kind of map of the underworld, with warnings about hazards encountered and advice on how to avoid them. One section is titled Spell for an Ancient Civilization and lists formulas to be recited when encountering certain creatures. The text enumerates the beings that appear in these myths: creatures with animal heads, warriors armed with weapons, beings with fire in place of eyes. Egyptologists traditionally explain these as mythological. But what if these descriptions should be read literally? What if there really are security systems under the pyramids, a kind of sentinel created by ancient technology? In that case, we could be talking about mechanisms or biomechanical beings programmed to guard specific chambers and corridors. Such an idea sounds like science. Recall the story of Farouk and his team. They saw a figure moving mechanically. They observed ancient devices that seemed to come to life after millennia of silence. They saw a glow and heard a hum, felt the activation of some system. This gives the impression that the system is not destroyed but merely asleep, awakening when someone approaches places that should not be disturbed. If one accepts such a hypothesis, even temporarily, a broader thought arises. All the major ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Sumerian, Mayan, Incan, have similar legends about beings who descended from the heavens and taught people agriculture, writing, and construction. It is curious that all these cultures built pyramid-like structures. Even more curious is that many of them disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The Mayan cities, for example, were abandoned in the 9th century AD. The inhabited houses and storerooms remained untouched, filled with food supplies, tools, and valuables. But there were no people. Millions of inhabitants of these regions vanished over the course of a few decades. The question of where they went, whether they died from an unknown disease or left their cities for other reasons, remains open. These facts, combined with descriptions in ancient texts and rare accounts of strange mechanical phenomena, make one wonder whether a more complex reality lies behind the. Where did entire settlements go? Some suggest that people simply migrated to other lands. However, neighboring territories do not show a sharp demographic surge during that period. Others propose more fantastic versions. Perhaps they didn't leave on foot but through certain portals, returning to where their teachers, the gods, came from. It is also interesting that the Mayan pyramids themselves, this cenote, the very sacred well into which the Maya tossed sacrificial offerings, turned out to be not only a ritual site, but a storeroom of oddities. At the bottom of the cenote, archaeologists found metal discs with engraved symbols, and these finds raised the material they were made of proved unusual, something between bronze and good quality steel, but with admixtures of elements not expected in ancient alloys. Attempts to determine the alloy's composition precisely have so far yielded no definitive result. The signs on the discs could not be deciphered either. They do not. Some researchers discerned in these symbols the same system of signs as on the cylinder found during Bessen's expedition. The same geometric patterns, the same recurring elements, led them to suspect a connection. If this parallel is real, two explanations present themselves. Either there were contacts between Egypt and the Americas thousands of years before Columbus, or both civilizations received their knowledge from a single source. That very ancient race that roamed the planet, built pyramids, and left messages. But whom are these inscriptions addressed to? Perhaps they were intended for future generations. Perhaps they were a hint for the creators themselves, so that, returning millennia later, they could find their way to hidden treasures. Or maybe the message was left for those who will one day arrive from space and search Earth for signs of intelligent life. Project SETI, the program searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, has been listening to the cosmos for 60 years in hopes of catching radio signals from other civilizations. This raises the possibility that people are looking in the wrong place. Perhaps the message is already here on Earth, hidden in the stones of the pyramids. In 2001, a group of radio astronomers from Canada carried out an unusual at the frequency of 1020 megahertz. The so-called hydrogen line is registered, the very frequency at which neutral hydrogen emits in the universe. Many researchers consider it a natural marker for interstellar communication. The signal was weak but remarkably stable. It arrived not continuously, but in discrete pulses. The interval between pulses was one pulse every 11 minutes and 11 seconds, with the repetition precise to within 1 millisecond. Astronomers were astonished by such mechanical regularity. Natural sources do not produce such rhythms. There were two possibilities left. Either we were dealing with an artificial transmitter, or this was an incredible, virtually impossible coincidence. A team of scientists set about decoding. They carefully analyzed the duration of the pulses, their strength, and the pauses between them in search of patterns and encoded information. It turned out that short pulses could be read as ones and long ones as zeros, which produced a binary sequence. Binary code is the basis of modern digital technology. It encodes all our computers, 0 and 1, off and on. Unexpectedly, it turned out that the pyramid, built roughly 4,500 years ago, was transmitting exactly binary code. Converting that binary sequence into numbers, the scientists obtained a familiar string: 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, 2. The realization of this fact further strengthened the sense of intent in the message. Not random noise, but a mathematical constant accessible to any intelligent civilization. The Canadian scientists published the results in an obscure scientific journal. The article caused a small stir among enthusiasts, but mainstream science largely ignored the publication. The discovery looked too controversial. I contacted one of the paper's authors, Dr. Thomas Brown, now retiring. He agreed to meet and tell me in detail about the work. We talked for 3 hours, and his words made me see the events in a new light. According to Brown, after the publication, the team did not stop. In secret, at their own expense and without grants, because no one supported what they considered a pseudo-scientific topic, they continued observations. Having installed more sensitive equipment, the scientists took measurements for a year and discovered one important fact: the signal changes. Once a month at the full moon, the sequence in the signal changes, perhaps only slightly but systematically. The number e, the base of the natural logarithm, was mentioned separately as another fundamental mathematical constant in the structure of the message. Twice a year on the days of the spring and autumn equinoxes, the signal becomes noticeably more complex and richer in content. Brown, his colleagues, and I recorded these variations, carefully analyzed the data, and used a computer to convert the binary code into an image. When the picture appeared on the screen, a starry sky unfolded before us, but not a modern one. The constellations were positioned as they had appeared roughly 10,500 years ago. It is to this epoch that the astronomical orientation of the ancient pyramids points, as we had already discussed in our research. In the image, 3 stars were highlighted, bright points connected by lines, the belt of Orion. In addition, there was another separate star in a different part of the sky. I asked Brown to check its coordinates against astronomical databases. It turned out to be that very one, from the Zeta grid. The same star that appeared on the map from Bessin's expedition, and that the ancients pointed to as the birthplace of the gods. Brown mused, coincidence or confirmation, and went on. We understood. This was not a random string of symbols. It was a beacon, an automated device that regularly transmits coordinates into space. Perhaps it was calling someone to return, or perhaps warning outsiders to stay away. I asked why he hadn't published the data. Brown grew somber and told us that they had been preparing a paper and had gathered all the evidence. But a week before publication, some people came to them. 2 men in dark suits showed credentials from a government agency and stated that our research touched on matters of national security and had to be stopped. How could a signal from an ancient pyramid pose a threat to national security? I wondered aloud. Brown answered that only one logical option remained. Governments already knew about the existence of such a beacon and were trying to maintain a monopoly on the information. He was made to understand either we stopped our work and destroyed all the data, or unpleasant consequences would follow. They hinted at possible charges of fraud, the revocation of academic degrees, and problems with the tax authorities. We were frightened and decided on radical measures. We erased all records and dismantled the equipment down to its parts. We scattered to different cities and never returned to the topic. However, Brown secretly kept a fragment. He hid a small piece of the audio recording on an old hard drive he kept at home. He gave me a copy of the file. I listened to that signal dozens of times. It contained a strange pulsation, almost musical, with a hypnotic rhythm. After prolonged listening, I began to feel slightly dizzy. There was a sensation that the surrounding reality was becoming less dense and distinct. Could this be written off as the power of suggestion? Or was the cause in the signal itself? Perhaps some frequency was affecting the brain. Or maybe it was something even more unusual, for which our words are not yet adequate. There are studies showing that sound frequencies can change states of consciousness. Meditative melodies, binaural beats, shamanic drums, all of them work through resonance with brainwaves. When an external rhythm matches internal oscillations, the brain begins to synchronize and shifts into a particular state. In that state, the boundaries of ordinary reality blur and perception becomes different. And what if the signal coming from the pyramid was not merely a set of coordinates or random noise? What if it was a kind of activation code? Some pattern of sonic relationships that, when perceived correctly, opened access to what is hidden from ordinary sight. Ancient priests, it is known, performed complex rituals in the pyramids and knew how to work with sound. They used chants, drums, and metal plates that produced high resonant tones. Under the influence of these sounds, they would enter trances and, according to their own testimony, communicate with deities. Perhaps their experiences cannot be called mere hallucinations. Perhaps sound really opened a path to another level of being, where gods or beings from another dimension or another time could make contact. The underground chambers beneath the pyramid could have served as amplifiers of such effects. These resonators drive sound waves to maximum intensity, creating a place where the boundary between worlds is at its thinnest. That is why one could not descend there carelessly, not because of radiation or the threat of collapse, but because one might see things not meant for the human eye. Those who went too deep either vanished without a trace or returned forever changed. This man spent beneath the majestic stone slabs far more time than any other researcher in the past 100 years. His name is Zahi Hawass. He was Egypt's Minister of Antiquities and was regarded as the chief custodian of the Giza Plateau. He personally supervised and controlled all archaeological work in the pyramid area from 1987 to 2011. Hawass is a controversial figure who provokes strong reactions. To some, he appears as a zealous defender of Egypt's heritage. Others see him as something entirely different, a man who restricts access, obstructs independent research, and, in their view, hides the truth. He consistently rejects any alternative interpretation of the pyramid's construction, calling such hypotheses pseudo-scientific. In his words, the pyramids are above all tombs, period. There are no mysteries or enigmas that would require a different explanatory model. However, in 2009, an episode occurred that caused many to doubt this unyielding stance. A group of French journalists obtained permission to film a documentary about the pyramids. Among them was a cameraman who happened to be in the right place at the right time. During an interview with Hawass at the entrance to the descending passage of Khufu's pyramid, he captured something unexpected. A low, humming, vibrating sound emanated from the depths of the structure. It was the very sound eyewitnesses had earlier described as similar to a machine at work. Hawass's expression changed instantly. He cut the interview short and demanded the cameras be turned off. Nevertheless, the cameraman decided to continue filming secretly and hid the camera. The footage shows Hawass taking a radio and saying something quickly in Arabic. A minute later, guards ran up to him. The journalists were escorted out of the pyramid and filming was stopped. I saw that recording myself and heard that hum. I remember Hawass's face. the expression of someone who seemed to know what lay below and very much did not want outsiders to find out about it. After the incident, Havis's control became even tighter. For an independent researcher, obtaining permission to work there, unsupervised, became virtually impossible. Even prominent, world-renowned scientists were often refused. Then, in 2011, when the country's government was shaken by the revolution, despite the scale of the destruction and thousands of priceless items, only a few pieces disappeared without a trace. Among the stolen were 2 statues of pharaohs from the Old Kingdom era, and it was rumored that scrolls were stored at their bases. Those scrolls, sources claimed, contained maps of underground tunnels. The official explanation attributed everything to the chaos of revolutionary times. However, many experts believe it was not random. Who could have taken advantage of such useful disorder to gain access to information stored for decades is a question with no definite answer. Various theories were put forward: intelligence services, private corporations, secret societies. None of the statues were ever found. With them, it seemed, the knowledge of what lay beneath the pyramids had vanished too. But perhaps that information did not disappear at all. Maybe someone had already found the scrolls and descended into places where no human foot had trodden for millennia. In 2016, a strange photograph appeared on the internet. An anonymous user posted it on a forum dedicated to ancient mysteries. The picture was poor quality, clearly taken on a phone in low light. It showed a stone wall covered in writing, but it was not the familiar Egyptian hieroglyphs. On the slab, one could make out the same enigmatic symbols and geometric patterns Besson had written about. Beneath the image was not all here yet. The forum literally exploded with comments, guesses, and demands for proof. The user disappeared after a few hours. The account was deleted, and the image was removed from the site. Some members managed to save copies. I obtained one of those copies and sent it to a computer graphics specialist for analysis. The expert concluded the photo was genuine and not a fake. The metadata indicated the time of capture was 3:47 a.m. It turned out that at 3:47 a.m., someone had been at a depth of minus 62 meters beneath the pyramid. How did that person get there? How did he get past the guards? And most importantly, what did he see? From the hidden inscription came another chilling statement. They are still here. Who are they? Guardians, some kind of mechanisms or living beings? No one could say for sure. There was one more detail that several attentive researchers noticed. In the lower left corner of the photograph, emerging from deep shadow, part of some object could be made out. It was something vertical and cylindrical, with a cold metallic glint, an item that immediately brought to mind the descriptions of the cylinders from the Besson expedition. If this really is that very chamber they spoke of, then the photograph serves as simple proof of its actual existence. It ceases to be, and that means someone truly was there, quite recently, only a few years ago. I tried to track that person down. I traced the IP address linked to that electronic form and followed a trail that led into dead end. Whoever stood behind those traces was skilled at hiding them. But I did not give up. I gathered every bit of available information, interviewed possible witnesses, compared and analyzed data, isolated matches and anomalies. Gradually, from the scraps of information, a single disturbing picture began to take shape. Under the Pyramid of Cheops, there extends not just a few separate chambers and narrow passages, but a sprawling underground complex, almost a whole city. It is not merely a network of corridors, but a labyrinth of tunnels, descending to depths of more than 100 meters, with rooms of various sizes and purposes. There is a storeroom of artifacts, laboratories with ancient devices, and in the very heart, at the deepest, it could be an energy generator, it could be a portal, it could be some kind of computational register. We can only speculate. But one thing is clear. Whatever it is working. It emits energy, sends signals beyond the Earth, causes anomalies that are recorded by modern instruments. These anomalies are obvious. They cannot be dismissed as measurement errors. The Egyptian government knows about it and prefers to keep silent. If the truth comes out, the consequences will be catastrophic. Not only will the official version of Egyptian history collapse, but the very concept of linear progress of human civilization will too. From childhood, we were brought up to believe in linear progress, from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, then the Iron Age, from agrarian society to industrial, from industrial to the Information Age. Progress, evolution, a constant step forward. That is the framework on which we are used to reading history. But what if it is not so? What if history is cyclical? Civilizations rise, reach unprecedented heights, survivors lose technologies, forget accumulated knowledge, and revert to primitive ways of life. After long intervals, a new society rises from the ruins again, building on the forgotten foundations of the old. Geologists find traces of several global catastrophes in Earth's history, and these traces give reason to think that our current path of development may be just another turn in a much larger cycle. Asteroids could have struck the planet with devastating force. Supervolcanoes could have erupted on a catastrophic scale, and abrupt climate shifts could have torn apart the familiar course of life. Any of these phenomena could have destroyed a civilization if one had existed before. The comets are presented as a message from those who survived the previous cycle, a kind of time capsule in which knowledge was stored for future generations. They were made of stone because that material is the most durable known, and they were meant to withstand any test for centuries. They built these structures enormous. Inside, deep underground, everything needed by the next civilization is hidden, so it will not repeat the ancestors' mistakes or stumble into the same traps. However, we cannot access this information yet, because those who control access to the pyramids have decreed they consider us too primitive, too aggressive, and too irresponsible to possess technologies comparable to gifts of the gods. There may be some truth to that. Just look at how we handle the technologies already at our disposal. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and artificial intelligence capable of slipping out of control. We stand on the brink of self-destruction. If people were given access to the pyramid's power systems, to portals, and to devices that can alter reality, it would threaten not only our fatal mistakes, but the destruction of the planet itself. That is why the secret is guarded. Researchers are intimidated, witnesses are silenced, evidence is destroyed. This is done not out of malice, but out of fear of what might happen if the truth comes out. Nevertheless, the truth seeps through drop by drop, bit by bit, and one day it will accumulate to such an extent that it will no longer be possible to hide. Maybe it will happen in our lifetime, or perhaps in a generation, but it will happen. And when we finally descend into the deepest chamber beneath Khufu's pyramid and see what is hidden there, we will understand who we really are, where we came from, and where we are going. Perhaps we will discover that we are not alone in the universe, and that our ancestors were part of a galactic community that visited Earth thousands of years ago. We are descendants of the stars, and our place may not be limited to a single planet. Perhaps part of us is already scattered across the expanse of space, distributed among the distant and nearby corners of the universe. Or it may turn out that we will discover something even more astonishing. Time may prove not to be a straight line, but a layer where the past, present, and future coexist simultaneously. In that case, the pyramids would cease to be mere stone blocks, and they could serve as bridges that the ancients used to come to us, and we to them. Or the truth may be so strange that we cannot even imagine it. It may turn out that our reality is a simulation, a carefully programmed matrix. Then the pyramids would become access points to the code of the cosmos, places where one can read and perhaps rewrite the laws of physics. I am not claiming which of these versions is true. It is possible that more than one version is correct at the same time. It could well be that the truth is even more astonishing than any of our guesses. But there is one thing I have no doubt about. There is something beneath the Pyramid of Cheops. It is something ancient, powerful, and truly mysterious. This thing is capable of overturning our notions and changing the course of history when we finally discover it. And the moment of that discovery is drawing near. Technology becomes more advanced each year, scanners more precise, researchers more persistent, and public interest steadily grows. The pressure is rising, and sooner or later, the authorities will not be able to keep the information hidden. When the veil of secrecy falls, humanity will face a choice: to take the greatest step forward or confront a reality for which it is unprepared. This choice does not belong to an individual, nor to the keepers of secrets. It belongs to all of us together. Whether we want to know the truth and are ready to accept its consequences, each must answer that for themselves. Meanwhile, the pyramid stands, silent, eternal, and impenetrable. It guards secrets older than any religion, any philosophy, and any science. It waits until we are ready to open the doors to its underground world and see what has been hidden for so long. And perhaps on the very night you go to sleep, you will dream that you are standing before a massive stone door in the darkness of an underground tunnel. The door is covered with strange markings that emit a soft green light. Behind the slab there is a sound, low and vibrating, like the breath of an ancient machine, as if ready to be switched on. This hum seems familiar, and suddenly you realize you have heard it somewhere before. Not in a dream, but in waking life. There are people for whom it has become a familiar nocturnal accompaniment. Residents of the outskirts of Giza wake every night at 3 o'clock to a dull noise coming from below, from the bowels of the earth. Some complain of throbbing headaches. Some have strange dreams of corridors bathed in blue light. In these dreams, they see faceless beings wandering the passages and examining some. Local doctors explain what is happening as mass hysteria and psychological stress from living near ancient monuments. Patients are prescribed sedatives, but the pills bring no relief. The reason is simple. The sound really exists, and the visions have already become part of people's experience. In 2020, neurophysiologist Sarah Mitchell from Stanford came to Upuaut to study the phenomenon. She installed sensors in the homes of several residents who regularly complained of a nighttime hum. The devices recorded infrasound, sound waves with frequencies below 20 Hz, which the human ear does not perceive consciously, but which affect the brain and internal organs. The recordings showed a clear source of infrasound coming from beneath the ground in the area of the Khufu pyramid. The vibration frequency varied from 7 to 12 Hz. These ranges are known to produce fear, anxiety, and a sense of an external presence in people. The same frequencies are believed to cause phenomena. Mitchell checked possible explanations for the origin of the sound and ruled out seismic activity. She also dismissed the subway theory, there is none there, and ruled out the influence of industrial equipment. The source proved to be stable and precise, like a clock. It turns on precisely at 3 a.m., runs for exactly 37 minutes, and then falls silent. This happens every night without exception. 37 minutes is the time needed to carry out a full diagnostic cycle of a complex system, to check sensors and nodes and make sure everything is functioning correctly. That is how automation is arranged at critical facilities, at nuclear power plants, at space stations, at any installations on which the safety of people and systems depends. Such complexes are built on the principle of self-monitoring. The system placed under the pyramid conducts a full-scale self-diagnostic every night, checking the condition of its nodes and connections. The infrasound sometimes felt around is not the purpose, but merely a side effect of its operation. Its creators did not design it to interact with humans, and therefore did not aim to muffle those acoustic manifestations. Mitchell wanted to make her findings public. She prepared an article and submitted it to Nature, but it was rejected without explanation. The same happened with other journals. Rejections came again and again. Then she received a call from her university. The dean politely but unequivocally informed her that her contract would not be renewed and that the faculty's budget had been cut. He added that it was nothing personal. A month later, Mitchell left academia and now works as a consultant for a private IT company. When I ask her questions, she answers evasively and says she no longer works on them. Her silence is not an expression of oblivion, but a learned defense. She has learned that in some cases keeping quiet is the only way to stay alive. Meanwhile, the system beneath the pyramid continues to run its cycles, night after night, year after year, for 4,500 years, perhaps longer. It has been cycling through its parameters and waiting for something, an answer or a signal. What exactly, no one can say. There is one other person who might have known more, but he is no longer among the living. Professor Amir Hassan, an Egyptian physicist and specialist in quantum mechanics, in 2018 gained access to the closed archives of Cairo University. Those holdings contained documents dated to the 1920s, the records of a British archaeological expedition led by Howard Carter, the man who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. In the found records, Hassan came across a mention of in 1926, Carter, having already finished excavations in the Valley of the Kings, obtained permission to conduct investigations beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. He used equipment that was new for the time, electromagnetic detectors developed by Nikola Tesla shortly before. The instruments registered an anomaly, a powerful electromagnetic field emanating from the depths, so strong that the meters pegged out of range. Carter attempted to descend to the source, to the very bottom of the passage under study. At a depth of 30 meters, his team encountered something unexpected, a massive granite plug, tightly sealing the tunnel. It was a huge block, as if placed there specifically to block access to the interior. Carter ordered the barrier destroyed by explosion. When the workers began drilling holes to set the dynamite, a gas poured out of the boreholes. It was unusual, dark in color and glowing in the dark. 3 workers inhaled the gas and immediately lost consciousness. They were brought to the surface and carried out of the shaft in a hurry. 2 regained consciousness after several hours, but the third never woke. The doctor who examined the deceased recorded signs of poisoning by an unknown substance. His lungs had been burned from the inside, and his blood cells were destroyed at the molecular level. The body was cremated that same day. No autopsy or further investigations were carried out. After these events, Carter ceased work at the site. His diary contains a final entry dated August 12, 1926. What lies beneath the pyramid should not be disturbed. The ancients sealed it. He lived another 13 years, cataloging artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb, and died in 1939 of lymphoma, a type of cancer that often develops after exposure to radiation or toxic substances. Professor Hassan tried, based on witness descriptions, to identify the gas that had been found. The bluish glow, high toxicity, and cellular destruction at the molecular level led him to several hypotheses. It could have been ozone at very high concentration, or vitorit, a substance formed when certain minerals break down, or something more exotic, plasma stabilized in a gaseous state by unknown technologies. Hassan suggested there might be a sealed chamber under the pyramid filled with this gas under pressure. In his view, such an atmosphere served as protection. Anyone attempting to enter would be poisoned. But it might not have been merely a trap for looters. The fiercely guarded space could hide something that must not come into contact with air, because upon exposure it could activate, disintegrate, or begin to spread. On this basis, Hassan wrote a paper proposing that the ancients might have created a biological weapon. He put forward the disturbing hypothesis that under one of the pyramids, something biological could be stored, a virus or bacteria produced by genetic. In his view, if accidentally or deliberately released, this microorganism could trigger a new pandemic. His article was published in a widely circulated scientific journal. A week after the publication appeared, Hassan was involved in a car crash. The official version sounded simple: speeding, loss of control. The car ran off the road and plunged into a canal. The body was recovered only 2 days later. Relatives demanded an independent examination, but they were denied further investigation. The funeral was held quickly and quietly, and the journal that printed his paper closed a month after the article saw the light. Coincidence? Possibly. But there are too many coincidences surrounding people who, if a biological threat is indeed hidden beneath a pyramid, that does not necessarily mean a weapon in the conventional sense. It is quite possible that it was the product of a failed experiment, an attempt by the ancients to create a cure for death or a means of extending life that ended in catastrophe. The result could be a virus that does not kill instantly, but slowly transforms the host, turning them into something else. Remember the mutated skulls in the Cairo Museum, elongated with increased cranial capacity. Perhaps these are not traces of another race at all, but the result of such a pathogen's effect on the human genome, an intervention that changes anatomy and physiology. If that hypothesis is correct, the ancient gods with elongated heads are not aliens, but transformed humans. Those whom the virus did not kill survived, but they became different. Their brains may have enlarged, their mental capacities increased, perhaps they were even granted a different lifespan. Yet with that, they lost something important: compassion, human warmth, the usual instincts of self-preservation. They became alien, emotionally cold. These beings turned out to be not quite human and not machines in the usual, and perhaps it was they who built the underground complexes and created the power systems that still exist to this day. They had vast knowledge, but lacked wisdom. In the end, they destroyed themselves. Some were wiped out by war. Some died in catastrophes caused by their own experiments. The remaining humans sealed the underground chambers and hidden vaults. The tunnels were closed with massive granite blocks. They fashioned legends of curses and traps to frighten future generations away from dangerous entrances. But human memory is short. Tales fade and blur over time. Curiosity is always strong. We are approaching the moment when the protective barriers will be overcome. Technology is now advanced enough to breach granite defenses. It can pump out poisonous gases and neutralize radiation. In 10, maybe 5 years, we will reach the deepest chambers, and then what is stored there will be revealed, and we will learn what that knowledge, or the seeds of that catastrophe, really were. Some scientists call to leave everything alone. They say, do not touch the past. What is sealed must remain sealed. But can human curiosity be stopped? We have always striven to know more, to go further, to discover the unknown. It is our essence. It was this drive that made us the dominant species on the planet. At the same time, it may lead to our doom. Not every piece of knowledge is safe. Not every door should be opened. Some secrets remain hidden not because evil forces hide them, but because the truth itself can be deadly. Imagine that you open the last door and enter the central chamber. You see the cylinders Besson spoke of. You step closer and touch one of them. It is warm, alive. It vibrates beneath your fingertips. Inside a system that has slept for thousands of years awakens. It detects a signal. Someone is here. Someone has passed all the defenses, which means the time has come. The cylinders begin to glow one by one. Green light fills the room. The sound builds. It penetrates like a radio signal through bone and thought. Suddenly there is silence, complete and absolute. You cannot even hear your own heart. And then a voice arises inside your head. It speaks in a language you do not know and have never heard, and yet you understand it. The voice proclaims, "Final protocol activated. The gates open. The return has begun." What could it mean? The question hangs in the air, and there is no answer. Who is returning and where are they coming from? We do not know, but the feeling is clear. Something vast, ancient, and almost unimaginably powerful has begun to move. This force is when this realization reaches consciousness, the way we view many things that seemed obvious until now changes. The pyramids cease to be simple tombs or ancient machines out of fleeting legends. They can no longer be called merely sepulchres, power plants, or monuments to the dead. They appear as beacons, signal towers built to transmit a message to someone far away. The earth seems prepared to receive, and humanity, but the thought of this is at once frightening and astonishing, because it allows for another, perhaps even simpler, and more disturbing version of events. Perhaps the pyramids are not beacons, but elements of an experiment, and we are its subjects. Our entire civilization may have been a project launched thousands of years ago by a being or beings who watch us the way we watch bacteria in a petri dish. They seeded this planet with intelligence, endowed us with tools, fire, language, and writing, and set up the pyramids as checkpoints, as markers of time. What that harvest is, knowledge, culture, souls, or simply genetic material for the next stage of their experiments, is unknown to us. Perhaps we will never learn the answer to this question, or perhaps the truth will become clear very soon. Because beneath the pyramid, something like a system is at work that counts down time. And when the counter reaches 0, an event will occur that will not begin with a loud explosion, but gradually and almost imperceptibly. The signs are already there for those who know how to see them. increasing reports of UFOs, official acknowledgments by some governments of the existence of unidentified objects, strange celestial phenomena that so far defy explanation by modern physics. Perhaps these are not aliens from distant galaxies, but those who once built the pyramids returning to check their experiment, to see how we are coping, and to make a decision. Are we ready for the next stage of development, or will the system require a reboot and everything will have to start over? The reboot could take the form of a new flood, a new ice age, or another catastrophe that will reset civilization and start the cycle again. The pyramids, however, will remain standing, as they did after past upheavals, as a memory of those who lived before us. And it is worth thinking about those who will come after us too. Perhaps that is their true purpose. The pyramid was never intended to be a beacon for cosmic travelers. It is not a power station. It is not a portal between worlds. Its true role is far humbler and deeper. It is a keeper of memory. A message from one era of humanity to another, to a future version of ourselves. We were here. That simple thought is encrypted in its stones. We existed, a reminder of our presence and our aspirations. We achieved greatness, and at the same time, learn from our mistakes. Do not repeat them, one plea sounds, or repeat them, and the cycle will begin again. Time will tell which path we choose. For now, the pyramid remains in place, demanding no answers. Under the moonlight, its faces gleam silver, reflecting the cold, clear shine of the night. Deep beneath its base, in the bow, the machine waits patiently for the right moment, keeping silence and secrecy. And such a moment may one day come, perhaps not as far in the future as we think. The doors will swing open. The mystery will become manifest. And then we may finally learn the truth. Whether we are ready to accept it is a separate, difficult question. For now, close your eyes and imagine yourself at the foot of this great pyramid. Feel the warmth of the polished stones beneath your open palm. Hear the faint hum rising from the depths of the underground, like the breath of musty antiquity. Know this: somewhere down there in damp, hard-to-reach chambers, patiently, as if it has kept its silence for many millennia. It will not reveal itself until we ourselves are able to hear it. Good night. May you dream not of the nightmares of ancient tunnels, but of clear dreams of the stars, among which our distant